Over the years, I've been lucky enough to have had the chance to work with many professionals who create award-winning infographics, including the graphics department at the New York Times. Interestingly, their department isn't staffed with graphic designers. Their job titles are graphics editors. These designers aren't handed an Excel document with a list of numbers and told to make it look pretty. Rather, just like a news reporter, they do the research, they get deep into the data, and they find a compelling story to tell. Before you choose colors, fonts, decide what cool charts or graphics to use, the most important part of creating an infographic is deciding what story it will tell. It's also the most difficult part. Why? Well, you've heard the phrase, "a picture speaks 1,000 words." Images and graphics tell a story. The challenge with infographics is that they usually contain multiple images and graphics, and you have to make sure that they all work together to tell the same story. So, how do you find your story? You act like a news reporter. You become a graphics editor. Here are 4 steps that I use to build a story for an infographic. Ask yourself questions, do research to get answers, visualize your data, and storyboard or sketch your ideas out on paper. It all starts with asking questions, lots of questions. A good place to start is what, where, when, who, why, and how. Be relentless. The more questions you can ask, the better. Write them all down. I like to use a word processor because it's easier to work with later on, but I also use a note application like Evernote, for example, so that I can always add questions as I think of them. It's rare that you'll think of every single question in one sitting. Questions come to you all the time, so being able to capture them in the moment is key. Once you've written a list of all your questions, you can start finding answers to them. I usually start with Google, but depending on the subject matter of your infographic, you may go elsewhere. For example, if your infographic is about specific information about your own company, you may be looking at internal data or reaching out to others in your company for more information. In general, asking others is a great way to get the answers that you're looking for. You can also use social media outlets like Facebook and Twitter to reach out to your audience. It's best if you can collect both qualitative and quantitative information on your topic. Qualitative data is detailed information that you can collect from individuals, say through user testing or a focus group. Quantitative data is more general information that you collect from larger groups via things like surveys or large spreadsheets of data, for example. You know you're doing a good job when your answers generate newer questions. Maybe you find out something that surprises you, something you didn't think was important suddenly is. And you ask yourself, why is that? Or what's causing that? Very often, you travel back and forth between asking questions and finding answers before you're ready to move to the 3rd step, which is visualizing data. Now, this is a process where you try to envision your data through images and graphics. It's really just another way to see the information to help you formulate your story. Perhaps you don't see a pattern by staring at a spreadsheet full of numbers, but once you convert it into a visual chart, you start to see patterns emerge. There are many ways to visualize your data, and it's an important step in the process of figuring out your story. We'll cover this step in more detail later in this chapter. Finally, before you're ready to build your infographic, you need to put it on paper, storyboarding or sketching out your story. How will you visually lead the reader throughout your story? You have to make decisions. Does your story have an ending? Are you specifically stating a deliberate finding in your data? Or is your story more of a cliffhanger? Is it something that sits with the reader afterwards, forcing him to think of potential ways that the story could end? Are the graphics that you intend to use going to accurately support that story? Or are they just going to confuse the reader? Ultimately, the style of your story is up to you, but you have to ensure that the story itself is clear and that you aren't telling conflicting stories within your design. These 4 steps can help you draft the story that your infographic will tell. This isn't something that you can do in 15 minutes. Sometimes it can take several days, and it's always best to give yourself some time to live with your story as it develops. You'll ask more questions, you'll find better answers, and ultimately, you'll end up with a better story. While this process is probably the hardest part of creating an infographic, it can also be the most fun part. Being a graphics editor helps you focus on creating an infographic that's both compelling and engaging.